Overrated, episode 18. We are here with FNRGFE coach Aero, and yeah, we've quite enjoyed your videos recently, and Caracol especially has expressed that he really enjoyed your take on things, so it made sense for us to invite you to the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
So would you like to introduce yourself to the audience,
Yeah.
where you came from, and yes.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Aero from Team FNRGFE. I've been in the Overwatch scene for a while now. I've been doing coaching for the most part. So yeah, I really love Overwatch as an esport, and I think it has a lot of potential. So yeah, hope to see it have a long future. Sure.
Yeah. The first time I became aware of your work was I was doing an interview with Verbo and Nomi, and I remember I called my article "The Immortal Brotherhood," and during that interview it became very apparent that these guys had a very good relationship and everything, and you guys were actually quite successful for the time being. Granted, like the overlords weren't quite in the land at this time, right?
Right.
Both with Rogue and Envy not being in North America, but you still won everything else during that time. And then something happened, and so I'm writing up this Immortal Brotherhood thing. I release it. 3 weeks later, Nomi's out, as well as, you know, like bringing the Koreans in. And were you still involved at this point?
No, I was not.
Okay,
no. At that point, I was working on another project.
Okay, so did it feel like an Immortal Brotherhood during that time?
Yeah, when I was working with the team, the guys were really close, and I think that's one of the big factors of teams that do really well are teams that can interact well with each other when the players can work well together, and all the players that were on Immortals had really good attitudes and worked really well with each other. I know that even I'm sure that when they were looking into bringing in the Koreans, and I'm sure it was a really tough decision because I know that Nomi and Athan were both really worked really well together with everyone, both like in game and out of game. I'm sure it was like really tough for them because I'd say an Immortal Brotherhood probably titles that era really well for them.
Yeah, I mean they came up as Sodipop, if I'm not misremembering, and at this time they were the longest standing roster, I believe, in the Western scene with all their players combined, right? So yes, you had some core still around, like Envy obviously had much of the core players for the longest time, but they were adding Mickey and everything. So yeah, these guys seem to have a pretty good synergy. Hype was also still considered one of the better divas, possibly in the world, right? And yeah, it came as a real surprise to me that it happened this way. But I think it's likely that that the Immortals organization already behind the scenes knew, okay, the other organizations will be bringing the big guns, and we have to, make certain changes that would allow them to remain competitive, right? So one interesting thing about the Immortals roster, which I wanted to ask you about, is, from my understanding, Verbo was the shot caller for the longest time. Now they changed that I believe to Grim or Agility's taking over more. Do you think that makes sense? Because they advertise it as a move to say, yeah, we're doing this move because it will increase our potential when, down the line. Does that make sense from your work with them?
Yeah, well, when I worked with them, both Verbo and Grim were very vocal players. It's hard to say that Verbo was sole shot caller because they both probably shared the load with most stuff. So I think in terms of shot caller, Verbo called most of the, all right, we're going to do XYZ, and that's probably why he was referred to as the shot caller of the team. So they probably, it makes sense to want to move that to another person if he's doing a lot more of the upkeep type stuff, like ult tracking and taking inventory of like where we're at in the map and what spaces we need to take or whatever. So if Grim's calling the plays, it kind of makes sense because they both did that together for the longest time, probably just shifting priorities at that point.
Yeah. And then down the line, then you were sort of one of these FNRG FNRGFE type characters, right? Like the archetype of this team seemed to be, okay, either teams split apart, or these players were no longer wanted by their main roster or something. And like you came together as a unit. Were you there for the creation of that team, or did you join later with them?
No, I joined later. Yeah.
Okay, and did it feel like a growing process then for these guys to come together? Because they basically formed a fairly new core, if you want to call it that, because only a couple of players were playing together before that, right?
You're referring to FNRGFE?
Yes.
Specifically? Yeah. So it started with the Gale Force guys, the four that were there, and they were working with Enigma, and they were friends with the Fnatic guys. So I came in, it was the second week of the Contenders Season 0 qualifier. So, the big, like, there's 500 teams or whatever. I came in during the second week of that. So, yeah, if that answers what you were looking at.
Yeah.
As far as timeline.
Yeah, I guess as far as like questions goes, I think we're fine here as to set up your character and how it worked out. If people obviously want to find out more about like your approach, check out your YouTube channel and your Twitter. I will have all this in the description. But yeah, let's talk about a little bit more about the open topics. So,
sure.
Carol, do you have any type of region of content you want to talk about first off?
Yeah. Like, so you've joined 2 rosters midway, right? The core was formed, the players like were cooperating for a bit, and then you came in. Was there any opportunity where you just formed the roster, where you're like trying to create the roster yourself in your time so far in Contenders?
Sure. Specifically within Contenders, not really.
Not Contenders, like in Overwatch, sorry. Yeah.
Just in Overwatch in general. Yeah, well, so see, of all my teams, most of them I came in midway through. But the one that I'd say I really had like the biggest hand of assembling it was I did work with TSM for a little while towards the end. At which point, I was the main one assembling. I'm sure you guys heard the leaked rosters of where it was Effect and Blam and Connor and Bishu. Like that was mostly me putting that together with those guys. So, and that was a potential roster. But pretty much every other roster I've come partway. They've already been formed, or I help make tweaks or whatever.
So, would you say that your big card is not about creating roster, but like helping the roster to meddle together better? Like, what is your area of expertise? Like, what people see in you? Because you've been involved with Immortals, you've been involved with FNRGFE, and they had great results, right? And I think up to a point you enabled it, right? We've heard and we had like topics on Reddit popping up about JCB, which was your analyst. But other topics, players in interviews were stating that you were like the manager of the team. You were arranging screams, making sure that everyone is appearing on time and stuff like that.
Sure.
So talk us a bit through that process and in general, what was your role in these teams?
So I think coaching staff in Overwatch right now currently isn't viewed the way that I think it can be. So I think what a lot of players are looking at right now as a coach is just like something who's really good with theory, really good at analyzing stuff. But I believe that a coaching staff should have multiple roles and focuses. So the coach, the role I usually take is there's the theory, the theory side of things, which everyone should be involved in, players, analysts, everyone should have a hand in that. The focus should be the analyst more there. Then you have the reality of what's happening. And so the coach should be focused on bridging the two. So my goal as a coach is to make sure everything's always fluid. Structure is the most important thing a team can have. So that's showing up to every scrim with a goal. Like they said, showing up on time, making sure everything's set. That the only thing you have to worry about, my goal is the only thing that a player should have to worry about is performing and getting better. Those are the only things they should have to worry about. Everything else between the coach, the analyst, or whatever staff you have, that should be taken care of. So that's why I kind of see myself as the person that bridges those things and just makes sure everything is fluid. So from whether it's comms, whether it's comps, whether it's, someone's, situation, whatever it is outside of game, all that stuff is where I should be focusing, or coaches should be focusing, to enable the players to be in the right type of growth. It's viewing it like if you're trying to have a good garden, you have to till the soil, and you have to make sure that it's a right atmosphere for growth. And that's where coaches should really be focused. It's making sure everything's perfect so the players only have to grow.
Were you the one that hired, like not really hired, but approached JCB to be the analyst, or how did that happen?
Yes, that's actually an interesting story. JCB came on in between season 0 and season 1 for us. I did everything as far as coaching wise before that. And what I like to do as a coach is I like to basically audit myself. So I'll go back over the past couple months. I'll look at all the stuff that I did, all the analysis I provided, everything. I keep records of everything I do. And I looked over it. And one of the big areas that I saw was I work a full-time job. So I have a 9 to 5, and then I also coach the team. And one of the biggest ones is I would be late to a lot of the scrim blocks because of my job. And then also I didn't feel like I could provide enough analysis and focus on theory just because of the time. So one of the things I approached the guys about in between the seasons is like, hey, I really think we could benefit from having another person to help with this. And JCB was a friend of Banny's. Banny, they played on a team together, and Banny recommended him. And so, I sat down with him. We talked over some stuff and decided to bring him on. And so he focused a lot more on doing the reviews. He was my eyes when I wasn't there. So I was in constant communication with him. If I wasn't there for scrims, which happened more frequently than I would have liked, but it's kind of the way it was. So yeah.
Because I think like this is an area in Overwatch that is either overlooked or not paid the proper amount of respect. Like because so many rosters had so great talents on them, and I think they didn't have the coaching stuff, and not only some guy to just arrange the screen blocks and stuff like that, but also what you say, like having a person who overlooks stuff, who tries to bridge the theory with the reality, and that's they failed, right? And I think like I'm not 100% sure about it, but somehow like the Bazooka Puppies rosters or some kinds of these rosters where they had talents on them, but they couldn't like make it work. And you could see like through the stats that they were swapping around so many heroes in every game, and they were trying to find a composition that was working. But like other coaches or yourself, you could see that this composition won't work because you don't have like a setup that you're going to execute. So it's mostly like in-game swaps because you're hitting a goal and you need to find some way to break it. And I think like this is greatly overlooked going into Overwatch League because there hasn't been so much time around for these kind of people to flourish, right? I mean, I wanted to talk with you and I approached you because I feel like you're such a guy in this scene that has like these credentials, has worked with a few teams, not many teams, like for example. So you could provide some insight, but there are not so many people like yourself or like in this role around, so that Overwatch League rosters can pick from and assemble this coaching stuff that they need, because it's like the pinnacle of competition, and you're lacking one of the two foundations, I think, right now. Do you feel it like that? Like, do you feel like this area in the game is kind of small? Like,
yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely improvements that can be made as far as having that type of character on a team or role within the team. I think it's extremely important. Probably one of the one of the most important things. So before I was in Overwatch, one of the things that I did was I directed an internship program. And so I have experience like making people, helping people work together in situations where it's not ideal, you're not getting paid or whatever.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing in making those work is just making sure everyone can trust each other and making sure everyone can trust you. So that's one of the things where a lot of players, may not have the right respect for a coach because they haven't had a coach that, even if they're working on something that's a negative for a player, like if you don't set up the foundation that regardless of what the coach is working on, it's always for the benefit of the player. Nothing else matters. Once the team understands that, that's when people like me can thrive, and the team can thrive together and learn to trust each other. I think like Overwatch specifically requires a lot more trust than a lot of other esports, just because of the how long the fights are, how intense the fights are. Every single fight that you go into, you have your setups and you have your, if this happens, then we do this, whatever. You have all that set up, but 9 times out of 10, it's not going to go that way, and you have to be able to adapt on the fly. And one of the key things there is being able to trust teammates, being able to trust each other, that if you do go for some type of play, that someone else is going to be there to back you up. And that kind of trust is extremely important, and a lot of times comes from this type of environment that I try to provide, and I think that a lot of Overwatch League teams would really benefit from focusing on and building themselves.
So here's the problem, because I feel like if you're having coach tryouts, and I don't even know how those would work, because you probably want to have like a substantial body of work that you can judge the coach on. But how do you even test this type of stuff? Are coach tryouts a little bit problematic at the point? Because like some of those hires look like, have you done VOD reviews publicly? So we have a body of work for you, and not as much like are your team successful? Did you try out for teams, and how do you even try out as a coach?
Yeah, so coach tryouts right now I think are very flawed. I hope in the future that when there's more material out there that coaches have, you can get a better idea. But I personally believe that a lot of the things that you need from a coach are not tangible. So even though I may have, Coach X may have tons of public videos, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a good coach for the team. So I know that the way the coach tryouts kind of work right now that most teams are doing is, they'll have a coach or analyst, whatever, sit in on the scrims so they can provide feedback. And then they'll usually do like some type of VOD review, and they'll see how they do in VOD review, what kind of feedback they provide during scrims. And that honestly to me is very small-minded, in that there's just so much more that you need from a coach. So I hope in the future that there's a lot more that coaches get rated on, because like I said, I think a lot of it is intangible for what a coach.
Are your public VOD reviews a direct result of how these tryouts went? Did you feel like had you done those more before the hiring process was finished, you would have had a higher chance?
Yeah. So to the second part of that, yes, I do think that I would have had more of a chance if I did more public stuff. I think that's kind of silly, but it's the way it is. Was it a direct result of it? I've been wanting to do it for a long time. I happen to just have a lot more free time now. The Contenders isn't going on, so it's easier for me to do so. There was a little bit of, Overwatch League stuff. It's the reason why I started doing it as well. But mostly that I have more free time.
Yeah, it's also okay. So this is where you stay far away from the statements I'm about to make, but I think it's fairly ridiculous. We kind of know that, FNRGFE at least the core of that roster will be on Houston. And why would you not include one of the main factors why that team was, honestly, from the talent lineup, you would have to say, in hindsight, overachieving, right? Because Immortals, you would have had to predict Immortals to be better. You would have had to predict that Rogue would be better. For FNRGFE to actually get to the offline portion of Contenders wasn't it ridiculous? I don't think many people would have bet a lot of money on that. And it's like, why would you then? Yes, it's intangibles. What is tangible? Success, right? For the same reason that people bemoan that, the personalized SR system doesn't catch the real win conditions and doesn't rank people as much. What is tangible is win-loss rate and success. So why would you not bring one of the factors with that? And that's always ridiculous. And that was also, we interviewed, or we had Demon on the show before, who was a big part of the Movie Star Riders success in the past. So, and he is also struggling to find Overwatch League hiring. While honestly, like VOD review people that have, you know, steered their career more towards a on-camera talent situation are now in charge in many ways, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a silly situation. I think, and I hope that owners will, in hindsight, say, okay, now we know that this pattern doesn't work as much, and I'm not saying that these people, like, if they turn out to be very successful, then I will be their biggest fan, right? But like, I hope the scene has justified responses to the results that these will likely bring, or at least in my mind would make this way. Okay, so are you at leisure to say how many teams you tried out for?
I was considered by a few, but I don't know if I can say like how far I got with all that. So I'll just say like I was considered by a few, but as of right now, unless something changes within the next, well, that's 36 hours, I'm not going to be in Overwatch.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that window is closing, right?
Yeah.
So what is next then? Like, okay, so you've built a career on taking players that are sort of a random bunch and really like maybe diamonds in the rough, and then made them. There's a pattern for you, and I think it could have happened with TSM as well. Is that your teams tend to end up like right below the gods, basically, right? Like the NVS or the even FaZe at this point, like, and then both Immortals and FNRGFE were sort of, you know, fairly comparable in terms of what their results were. Like, is that something that you're looking forward to for Contenders Season 2?
Yeah, well, that's something that I was thinking about a lot, and when people ask me what's going to happen with the FNRGFE slot for Contenders, or whatever, I would personally like to see us be able to keep the team name and keep logo, because of what it stands for. When the players originally came together, and when when I came in, it was the guys got together because the orgs didn't think that the players, these people, were Overwatch League worthy. So the same concept still applies in the next season of Contenders, and so I think there's going to be a lot of people in Contenders that should have been in Overwatch League, but regardless, they're going to come into the next season of Contenders with a lot to prove and wanting to prove that they were Overwatch League worthy. So that same sentiment of wanting to prove that continues on through season, and so that's where the focus will be next, is doing it again, and proving again that with the right environment, with the right players, you can really make something work and really make something positive and happen with that kind of team. So.
Yeah, and now you also have to consider the gods are gone, right? They're no longer around in Contenders, so. And depending on how this structure might shake up, maybe Contenders might be, a proving ground for many talent that we will see, because the league will be extended. Some talent will drop. So depending on what the league will look like, I think it's quite interesting. And it keeps it fresh too for me, to see like what's happening in Contenders Season 2. And the rumors are that it is going to be bigger. And yeah, it's quite interesting to see, but the amount of uncertainties in the scene obviously don't help at this point, right? Nobody knows anything, so like you don't even know if you can have the roster. Who owns that, by the way?
So assuming that it stays the same from what it was in Season 1, it's whoever the team captain is technically owns that slot. So since we didn't have an org that bought the slot, our team captain was Boink. So Boink technically owns the slot. Now when we were all in LA, we all like sat together and talked about it. And it's if anyone doesn't get into Overwatch League, they're going to have complete ownership of that. And so that's pretty much where it stands. So whoever doesn't get in will have get to decide what to do with it, whether they want to build a team or, you know, sell the slot or whatever. I imagine no one would want to sell it. But
before we move on to Contenders Season 2, let's talk about
Sure.
the Season 1, like, and
Okay.
especially the playoffs, because one of the issues you had was with the LAN client, right? There was a bug and it affected your play style a lot, and what you could do, what conversation you could run. Some very crucial moments on maps that would have gone your way had it, for that bug not been there. And like, what other kind of info you have to share with us about the whole process? And like, were there any screams between the Europeans and the North American side of things? Like, I was very excited. I wrote an article about it. Many probably expected it. Like, there was a Reddit thread that was like, why do we have a team deathmatch with 4 players? Like, and eventually having to see Time playing Mercy of all heroes on that team deathmatch, like going full nuts. I mean, it's great to feel time in between stuff like that, have like some pros, do some funny stuff, but wouldn't it be like tons better to have an actual clash between the two champions, oh my god, of that tournament, and you know, all this stuff? Like, were there anything?
I think, honestly, I think that Blizzard kind of missed out on a really big opportunity at Contenders, because you have one of the biggest issues with EU versus NA in every game is just that they're so far away. It doesn't make sense. Like, you don't want to play with 200 ping to play the other teams, you know? So having them on the same soil and on the tournament client is a really cool opportunity. I know we got to scrim a couple of the European teams. We scrimmed Misfits, Giganti, and Cloud9. We didn't scrim 1, 2, 3. But it was really an interesting opportunity to see how each region plays, because each region has their own style, completely different style, which is the nature of like the players and how the best teams do, all that kind of stuff. So it was really interesting to see their style and play against them and see what works and what doesn't against that style. But I think it would have been really cool. Like, best case scenario would be the playoffs include all teams of North America and all teams of Europe going against each other in some kind of double elimination bracket or something like that. I think that would have been the best case scenario. At least have, you know, the North American champions face the European champions. That would have been cool to see Envy versus Giganti and watch Envy win, you know. But yeah, so it was really interesting. The tournament client, it's different. It's very different to play on the tournament client than it is to play online, because there's a lot of the subtle things in like sound effects are different, because there's just an example like Winston. If you're holding left click, the number of times you hear the tick of the damage, there's a lot more ticks of little damage on the tournament client than there is online. There's less ticks of bigger damage. So you hear, it sounds like the Winston players, even Muma said it as well. Muma and Nomi both told me, like, it feels like you're doing more damage, even though you're doing this just because there's more instances of the tick. And so, like, you're not used to it, so you kind of get baited, like, you know, I'm owning these guys, when really you're not. You know, that plus the Lucio bug was kind of unfortunate that I got banned, because, you know, I think Blizzard had ample time to address it beforehand, and we found out, you know, less than 24 hours before a tournament match that you know, it has to change and you can't use it. And it's, for us, we were probably the biggest abusers of it. That, I mean, we didn't think it was a bug. We thought it was like just something, I don't know, like. But Envy is probably the team that you abused it the least. So it's, you know, one of those things where it just was really unfortunate for us.
You found out about many things like in the last days. Like Blizzard had many surprises in store for you. Like, you learned about Seagull just like on the day it was updated on the site. They didn't inform you beforehand.
Yeah.
You learned about the LAN client issue just a few days before you had to play the match. I don't know, like, any other things that come to mind that could have been communicated better, but weren't.
Sure. Yeah, those were probably the two biggest things that have a big impact. I think it's important to have the communication for that kind of stuff be really nailed down between seasons, and even for Overwatch League, because that kind of stuff shouldn't happen. That, like, the Seagull thing, the way that they were telling people for subs was that you had to check the site see what changed. Well, the site had an error and it didn't update at all. So we thought Seagull wasn't on the roster. And well after the lock was in place. And then we found out a couple days, like a day before we're leaving for LA, that Seagull is on the roster and that there was just an error with the site and like they just didn't tell.
Well,
I don't know that's like I don't know if that's Blizzard's fault. The tournament organizer was working with them kind of was, part of it as well. But either way, like that kind of stuff should definitely be addressed beforehand, as well as how you decide when to put a sub in. It turns out that you have to submit your full sub lineup for each map. And so I should backtrack a second. Before the match starts, you have to select what map you'd want in case you get the map pick, and what side you want for each map in case you get the side pick. You have to choose it beforehand. Well, it turns out you also have to submit your sub. If you want to make a sub for a map, you have to decide that beforehand as well.
Wow.
So like Envy, for example, would have to submit beforehand that they want to play Seagull on Oasis way before the match even starts, or if they want to play him on
Is that just for the first map?
No, for every single map.
Ooh.
For
every single map.
Wow.
So we didn't know that because we didn't really need to use subs or whatever. But we found that out day of, because I think that helps the people that don't have subs, because you can like predict how if they're bringing a sub in for a specific map, it's because really set this up and feel like it's their best thing. Whereas if you're hot swapping and putting Seagull in because you feel like he would do really well, just how we're playing, it's kind of a balancing act. But all that stuff is communication that should have happened well in advance and made extremely clear, so there's no questions about it. Same thing with like picking the map twice in a series when it was in the best of sevens, like that. That's kind of another one of those things where it's like, yeah.
How did that happen? Like, did they just submit them up to ICE and the tournament organizers were like, oh, okay, like,
yeah. Well, I think,
whatever.
Yeah. Like the handbook said, like this is the maps you get to choose from, but it didn't specify that that map is removed if you played it already. I think it was assumed, but it wasn't specified. So, it wasn't specified, so you can use it.
Yeah.
That was like
talking about the point is kind of interesting, because currently it feels like teams are moving away from having these very, very versatile players, right? So for instance, like a Tivik had a huge hero pool, right? Someone like a Hureg and whatever. Now teams, because of Overwatch League, are also stocking up on players, and it feels like their plan is, especially for instance for a team like Envy, they want to cut the pools in half. So now, for instance, I don't know, let's say Taimu doesn't need to play Pharah anymore. They can sub in Seagull. Do you think that's the next necessary step for Overwatch, to specialize players more? And does that have any drawbacks? Because it feels like practice, because you practice less with the very same roster, team synergy could suffer from that one.
Yeah, I don't think that should be the next step for Overwatch. I mean, it's interesting to be able to do that, but it makes it extremely predictable for what you're going to do. So teams that have a strong analytical core and a strong structure and setup can abuse that. You know exactly how they're going to play, exactly what they're going to do. If Envy brings in Seagull, he's going to be playing one of 3, maybe 4 heroes. Otherwise, there's no reason to. I still think that it's important to have mostly between your 3 flex players, that you have everything covered, and that works together. I think it's different in a game like League of Legends. It makes sense because when you lock in a roster, you're in it for the next hour. Whereas a game like Overwatch, it's so adaptive that a team that can perform well on a comp, its counter comp, and that comp's counter comp will probably do better than the team that has one stop. At least that's what I imagine and what I think will happen. So I don't know that it's the best next step, but I mean, I guess we'll see. Because a lot of teams are going for that.
Wouldn't it also be sort of bad for the more, let's say, T2 Contenders team or even the amateur scene to make this necessary? Because that is very far sorry. outside the possibility of many of these contenders teams to have 9 players, right? If you're already making basically no money and it's tournament winnings, or maybe you get even signed by a small organization, like having 9 players on your roster is probably not feasible, right?
Right.
So,
yeah.
So would that move? Because, for instance, in CS:GO we had this talk about coaches not being involved in game, and Valve's justification was, yes, this is not how casual players play the game. There's no coach telling them what to do in any given situation, and that's why we don't want to have that in pro play. Now, in Overwatch, we also don't have 9 players even for amateur teams. So is pro play then too far removed from casuals?
Too far removed from the casual scene? I don't think so. I think there's that kind of distinction is fine to distinct between casual play and competitive play. It's the step in between Contenders and Overwatch League is where I think that, you know, here's the thing. The way I view it is, if you want to be a 1-trick or a 2-trick, whatever, you have that option. You know, in a situation like the CS:GO thing, you don't have an option of just having a coach to be there to provide them. You know, with Overwatch, you can choose that. You can choose what heroes you want to play, and you can choose what heroes you want to focus on. So I just don't think it's going to work out. And I mean, we'll see, I guess. It's kind of one of those things where it'll work out or it won't, and people will adapt and move on. It's kind of stinks for the Contenders teams because obviously people aren't going to want to have more than 6 players. If you're in Contenders, you don't want to sit on the bench. You just don't. Yeah. And no player is going to want to.
Definitely.
So I can understand if it's a mindset in Overwatch League where you're preparing for the next meta. If you have a meta where you have another Tracer dominated meta, it makes sense to have Tracer in there. But if you're doing it specifically to where, you know, you can predict what style you're going to play based on what people you're going to play, you know, it means that otherwise someone's just going to be sitting on the bench for however long a meta is. And if it stays this way, you know, the way Blizzard's been doing it before, metas will be around for quite a while. Each meta has probably been around for what, 3 months on average? 3 months, maybe 4. So
isn't becoming the unstoppable force like a rogue that was fairly predictable in what they were going to do also a way to sort of dominate an era, or do you think that's going to be increasingly likely because there's more analysis flying around, and also maybe the state of the game is different because eventually rogue was also figured out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that'll go away more as people get better staff and more practice mindsets when going into scrims and how you want to address things, and as you learn more. I think North America is really good at finding what the meta can be, but then adapting and building off of it is where North America lacks as a region. Whereas regions like Korea are really good at making whatever tweaks necessary to make them go from being a good comp to an outstanding comp. And so that distinction between like the baseline and the next level is, you know, where other regions excel and where North America doesn't. So as long as coaching staff improves and mindsets improve and teams learn to adapt more, then that'll eventually go away, where, you know, but to an extent it'll stay until teams learn to figure it out.
Since we're talking about metas, like many people have said that there's no point in watching a tournament if it's not played on the current patch. But this is a nightmare, like for all people on the coaching staff, for the players. Like, give like a bit of inside info on this one, like for players, what it's like to know that next week in a tournament that they have like created a style, figured out some things, everything is thrown out of the window. Like not everything, but like a new character is in here, he's overpowered, like he makes the game go to a completely different direction. And if you can ride that wave, good for you, like you will probably get a win, an easy win at that. But if you like can't ride that wave, like how was it like with the Contender season 1 where you had like this patch change between weeks 4 and week 5?
Yeah. So I do like that there is a tournament realm where you can play on other patches, because when things are pushed from PTR to live, as with pretty much every big update on PTR, not everything's fleshed out. Not everything works well. It takes time to really understand what's broken about a hero. So I think it's extremely important to be able to play on other patches. But the key to that, if you're in a tournament setting, is that there has to be a set date, and it communicated well in advance for what patch is going to be. That was actually one of the other things that probably could be improved. That I actually wrote a big feedback thing for both Carbon and Blizzard on like areas that could be improved, and one of those was in the communication, setting when this patch is going to be played as early as you can possibly know, so that teams can prepare for it. Give the teams time to prepare, because if it's, oh hey, next week you're going to be on a new patch, it's like, okay,
let's roll the dice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just kind of hope.
Yeah, you have to practice 2 patches actually. One for the week you're playing and preparing for the next week, which was something that happened like in Apex season 2, I think. Like you had the quarterfinals, and then the patch changed at the semifinals.
Right.
And therefore some teams had like 3 days to play on the new patch, on the completely new patch, and the other team had like 1 week, and they would to face the semifinals, for God's sake. It was like, okay, well. yeah,
that's rough. I think it actually ended up working out for us more in the specific patch in Contenders, because Buzz actually had been scrimming with teams on live for Overwatch League tryout, and so he had a chance to play the new Junkrat a lot more. So when we came into it, Buzz was like, look guys, strong, let's do it. And so we were like, okay, we'll build around this, let's figure it out. And it worked out, and we performed really well with the new Junkrat. So it worked out for us. But to that point, to make it fair and even for everybody, put more time in between and make it very clear this is when it's changing. And I think that's how as close to fair as you can get, so that way the champion or the hero has a time to be looked at from all angles, all perspective on what should be tweaked or whatnot, and then the teams also have ample time to prepare for.
Isn't it also not just patches? Because one thing I also thought about, and maybe players are over exaggerating this effect, but obviously the LAN client is very, very different even than playing on very low ping online, right? Is it actually that a lot more damage is flying around, and doesn't that also sort of switch up the possibilities you have? It feels like in Apex, Trace is just one clip Zenyatta's all the time, even though their Lucio is completely aware that this is going to happen. Prophet just runs up to Jaehong, just one clips him. There's nothing he could have done at this point. Maybe Zumba could have changed him, but Zumba already had to save Miro, so sometimes it feels like an indefensible play in how traces go, and you can't even practice for that, because like, what are you going to do? Like, ask Blizzard for the LAN client so you can sit like with Lunatic Eye in a room and practice that? Like,
yeah, that was interesting, because when we played on it, that was something that we really noticed. We had always heard Tracer is so much better, or does so much more damage on lane, but also it's easier to hit her on lane, supposedly. And that was one thing that we did notice right away, is heroes like Tracer, even Soldier. Buds really loved playing Soldier on LAN client, because a lot of those shots register a lot more than they do online. But at the same time, you also take more damage. So that's why I say, like, even from the, like, as little as things like sound effects, it would have been nice to have a lot more time to play on this LAN client, really get used to it and get the feel for it, because it honestly is, it's a different structure of a game, because there's so many little things that you have to learn, and little finesse things that you get used to with muscle memory or with sound effects, or audio cues, visual cues that are just different because of the nature of the way that they have, like, the grade and whatever. So I think it'd be cool to, I think that's an advantage that Overwatch League teams will have when they're all in the same area, being able to play on that LAN client.
Do you think that's possible? They will be able to scrim each other on LAN?
I believe so.
Oh,
because I think so. I think they'll be able to do that for at least the first 2 years whenever they're in LA. It'll be interesting to see when they're not in LA. If they don't have that opportunity, but at least I imagine. I could be wrong. Maybe Blizzard won't provide that, but I would hope so, because if you're gonna force someone to play every week in one way, you should let them practice that, going forward.
That would have been my next question. If you can't provide that LAN client, should you then just play even Overwatch League matches online to have a consistent experience?
I mean, if you want as most fair for the teams, yeah, but at the same time, I think it's a better game on the LAN client. If it feels better to play, so
yeah, I can see that. I think one thing that would then really boost talent that is already in Overwatch League is the experience on the LAN client, right? Like the hours that you have on this client would definitely help and probably boost some of that talent. Obviously, like if you can't have tryouts on LAN clients, then it's again like doesn't matter that much. But I think that is one. It's not just the environment, and across all esports, people are constantly saying, okay, sound is also a lot different, right? Like the bigger the arena, I think I remember back in CS 1.6, it was basically okay, you're playing without sound at this point, right? now it's getting better, like because you couldn't hear footsteps over the cheers, right? Now it's getting better with noise canceling headphones and everything. But yeah, in general, I think the experience is much different. And then if the game is on top of that different, yeah, then you're like this playing offline will become a very particular skill set, which makes it even more ridiculous that Overwatch League teams apparently didn't factor that much in their selection process, but went with a tryout system, where in a very short amount of time you need to assess a player, based not only on in-game stuff but also intangibles, right? So, what do you think about that process? Do you think that tryout, like for one, creating a team from scratch is feasible? And what about in general the idea of having online tryouts mean more than accomplishments?
So I really hope that that the coaches and the people assembling the teams looked at the intangibles a lot more, because I think the most important thing in a team, like I mentioned before, is trust and people getting along. So that has to be, personalities is the base, like foundation of what you should prioritize out of all these things. So going back, the ideal way, in my opinion, to build a team is you start with a core or a team that's already, so for example, if you were to take, let's just say Rogue as an example, if you wanted to pull players from Rogue, start with Rogue itself. And then the players that you feel are the weak points, give them a chance to fight for their spot. While bringing other people to trial to see if it works out. But you should start with a core, because people already know and trust each other. And then you build off that core and improve it over time. And you give the weak players a chance to fight for their spot. So building a team from scratch, those teams are probably going to do the worst in the first season of Overwatch League. Just by the nature of players having so much more experience with each other. And you have to learn all of your foundation pieces all over again, because people have different mindsets, people have different addressing things. So it's unfortunate, but the teams like San Francisco or Boston, they've announced their rosters and they don't have a core that they started with. They're probably do the worst, not because they're bad players. Like I don't think they're bad players, but just because they don't already have the synergy, they have to build that within a few months, which is possible. But the teams that already have cores, so like the Korean rosters that have been picked up, or even Dallas, they already have their foundations nailed down, and they can spend the next 3 months improving. And assuming that they do, they're just going to have so much more opportunity to grow and do better than these rosters that were put together from scratch. So I like I said, overall, I think the teams that started with a core or started with a team as a whole will probably be better. Yeah. At least for now.
I mean, I have... Okay, Caracol is going to burst out laughing in a bit, but I've been planning an article called The Core of 4, basically since April, and I observed a pattern of like success in teams that kept 4 players with each other. It doesn't even matter much what they're playing. Like for instance, with Envious, like Harry can just switch to Soldier. That's fine. Like you have the it's like this bring the player, not the hero type of situation. Or and do you think? Okay, I'm actually doing research on air here, but is there an intangible factor in that? Do you like socially see that in your teams, like that a core forms and then they sort of treat each other differently, or like calls tend to be more, you know, they trust each other more or whatever?
Yeah, I do. I think that your concept is good, because just socially, that like when you see these teams work together that already have that foundation of trust and friendship or whatever, you know, that good personality, there is definitely a difference from teams that don't. Because if you can be yourself with your teammates and not have to like put on a mask for teammates, then you're not focused on keeping up their mask, you're focused on your play. So teams that already have, you know, synergy with each other, that like each other, can really just focus on that. And I think that with how wild Overwatch League or Overwatch comms and fights are, just the flow of the game, that having a team that has worked together for a while, that likes each other, all that, a core of 4, like you said, I think 4 is probably the perfect number. It works better because your core, your philosophy, every team's going to have their own philosophy on how they address it. So whether it's how you address practice, how you address getting ready for a tournament match, how you address an upcoming patch, all those philosophies are going to be with the strongest voices on your team. And if everyone already knows what that is, agrees, and is all on board with your strong voices, then it makes it so much easier to find players to supplement that than it does to just put them together and hope it works. Because you need time to develop those philosophies and really make it work. So, core of 4, good.
Yeah.
At this point, basically, it's a sneak. It's like a trailer for a movie that will come out around December or something.
It is vaporware. Like, I don't know why, but I've wasted 50,000 words on that article, and it never gets like now I've turned to doing it more statistically, and that's also quite interesting. I've found out that so there's one flaw with that statistic about to mention, because there weren't that much tournaments. But usually for a championship team to win their first championship takes the core, like the time since core creation is about 180 days on average. And the quickest that has ever happened was, I believe, LW Blue, or they were called LW Red at this time. And they were, I think, just under 100 days. Now, right? Like, I think there's a social component, and that's why, like, my ideal system is the following for Contenders as well as Apex, by the way. Like, okay, so Overwatch League teams want to either, you know, scrap their roster because they were really underperforming, or new organizations come in. They take the best cores, the highest performing cores of that season in Contenders, bring also the other factors, so the coach would be included, and smart teams are actually doing that, like Cloud9, at least in the case of bringing the Kongdu Panthera coach over.
Right.
I don't know if they got the GC Busan. If they don't have,
they did.
Did they? If they didn't, that would be a pretty big mistake, I think, because that team was essentially also the same, and then just the guy rocketed in skill. And that usually doesn't only come out of the players finding in themselves the potential for excellence, but it's someone facilitating that, right? So, do you think that's a viable, you know, structure? As like, okay, Contenders provides educates these scores or builds these scores, and then they get bought out by Overwatch League teams?
Yeah. Yes, I think it can be. It can be. It just the factor is going to be how good are Overwatch League teams compared to Contenders team on a whole. Because if it turns out that Contenders just isn't as competitive, I don't know if it's worth it. You know, one of those things where I really hope that Overwatch League teams and Contenders team get a chance to play each other often, so that that level can be maintained throughout the whole thing. But I imagine that the cores will stay with Overwatch League, and then Contenders will be used to supplement. Unless the league expands to where there's more teams able to play in it, at which point then of course you should be looking for cores from Contenders team. But Contenders will probably be the supplement, and Overwatch League will probably maintain the cores. And if your team's in a position where you've been doing really bad with your core, then you gotta look on building a new core. So that's a possibility.
Yeah.
So
they have said about 24 teams as a whole for the Overwatch League. I mean, we have like 12 now, probably another 12 as the final form of this league once everything is set up. So these logics can be adapted. My biggest fear is what you say, like if the players coming from Contenders can't really even supplement, like because it's a very different scene, the experience that have the Overwatch League members have accumulated over, because it's a really long season, right? It's eight months or something. It's really long, like, and
it's long,
you can't really change players, although some hinted that for the first season you could maybe draft players even mid-season or something like that. But it's a very long season, and since it will be like isolated in their arena and in their environment, I'm not sure like how the Contenders, although I think it will be like more competitive in general because of the passing of people outside the league right now to compete, and they even form teams without knowing anything right now, and they try and they scream and they try to keep the flame on, and I hope that Blizzard really ignites the flame further, because like otherwise it's going to die down. It's, if they're going to say something like you're going to start Contender season 2 in January, for example, that's too far away for sponsors, for players to sustain themselves, right? So for me, a very big fear is like somehow Contenders can't really maintain a highly competitive play that can really nurture talents right now to be instantly picked by Overwatch League, because it's a different environment. We talked about the LAN Client, we talked about the structure, the duration of the league. Like there's so many different factors to put in the equation, so as to say that once Contenders ends season 2, season 3, I don't know how many seasons will be played till the Overwatch League season 1 ends. That's another factor. Like then I can like pick up straight away players from there.
Let me suggest another theory that actually Sideshow said. Okay, now that we know these Overwatch League rosters and know that like gods are basically in there with Lunatic High and GC Busan, and teams really went for the top dogs. I don't know how likely that is at this point, but what Sideshow suggested was, and I tend to agree for the Western lower level Western teams, is because the system in Contenders, if it has relegation, it's very likely that it will have relegation. It's sort of more like an evolutionary process, like almost like a natural selection, where like the worst teams will just drop out, and they have no, if the same roster rules apply, you can change week to week, a maximum of 3 players. So the selection process is a lot more, fluid, and that would make Contenders a much more potent way to, develop talent. And then also, if we have 3 seasons of Contenders, let's say, before the Overwatch League ends, the first season, then it is possible that because of this process of constant, natural selection, that Contenders teams have an equal or higher level than, at the very least, the mid-tier level Western teams in Overwatch League. And then obviously in APACs, like it's not impossible to think that the absolute best teams in the world will play in the final of APACs again during Overwatch League, right? Because of there's less restrictions. And if we're hearing like people talk about 2-year contracts for teams, 2-year contract, that like the game is barely played 2 years competitively, right?
Yeah.
Like basically like Clockwork and Seagull are like the only players. Okay, I guess Kuma too, that were around back then and are still relevant in Overwatch, right? It's insane to me to suggest that someone can predictably have a career in 2 years in Overwatch and is still a serviceable player, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think what like the big crux of what it'll come down to is Contenders and whatever the leagues are that are like Contenders for each region has to be sustainable for the Contenders players, because right now it's like a wildfire, and we need to keep that burning. But if players are playing with no information and playing without, you know, a sustainable living situation, it's just going to burn out. And so building Contenders to where there's, you know, the relegation system, like you mentioned, I think is very good. Keeps it competitive, but also that they're playing so that they can make a living off of it is a huge deal, absolutely huge deal. Whether that's, you know, something like endemic orgs coming back in for Contenders, or if it's just, you know, more tournament options or whatever. The way that it's been set up lately with Blizzard controlling mostly everything is that it means that everyone from Overwatch League to Contenders, the future is in Blizzard's hands. Within North America and Europe. And if that's the case, like I really hope Blizzard understands the gravity of that, because if I'm trusting the entire next year to you, like, it should be sustainable so that if you're in Contenders, you can live off of it. But at the same time, if you think about it like a lake or a sea to thrive, there needs to be feeder lakes for feeder streams and exit ones. So exit's pretty given in how players are going to exit in Overwatch League, but the feeder streams need to thrive as well. You know, so that's Contenders, NA, EU. Even if there was the South American leagues or Latin American league, the Korean and Chinese leagues, you know, all those things need to thrive and be sustainable for the people that are in there. So that way you can get from, you know, being able to focus on the game. If you can't focus all your attention on the game, you're just not going to be as good and not going to be up to the level. You just aren't. So I hope that they're sustainable. That's, you know, my biggest point for, you know, I hope that's being considered is that it's sustainable for everyone, the part of it, staff and players alike, and community members as well.
How did your team sustain itself? Were these players like living off of the salary they got when they were on pro teams? Because like FNRGFE is probably like a team that made the most out of their resources in a sense, because you also branded really well, right? Like
corn dog sponsorships.
Exactly. Like I'm sure there was some money made from the merch, right?
No.
Still,
I'm talking about corn dogs.
Oh,
provided like highly nutritious.
All meals were provided by corn dog.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no way these players had a sustainable salary during this, right?
No, no one did. Yeah. I think some had, you know, resources left over when they were on a team, but I'm pretty sure most, if not everyone, was living with their parents. I have a full-time job, so I live on my own. But, you know, I had to keep my full-time job for the whole time we're there just to be able to maintain this. And that's extremely tough, both on, you know, if you are having to, you know, live with family, that can be really tough. And you can feel really trapped in that situation for those players. And it's not just for us, but for any player that's in that situation, you know. So that, and if you are working a full-time job, it puts a lot of strain on you to be able to maintain both. But, you know, I think that was one of the coolest things about FNRGFE is how well the branding worked out for us. Because if we didn't sell any merch, we wouldn't have had, you know, that merchandise paid for Jacob to go to LAN. It paid for everything that we did in LA was paid for by that merchant.
The escape room as well.
All of the escape rooms we're part of it. Yeah, we actually ended up doing like 4 or something.
Wow! Did you get out of all of them?
No, we got out of 2.
Oh,
so 50% win rate.
Oh, that's a nice stat. I think other teams didn't make out of, even out of 1.
Yeah. Who's the MVP in your? Who gets most clues?
pretty sure it's me for all of them. No, no.
I mean, write that on your summary for an Overwatch League team, right?
Well, we know who makes the IQ plays on the server, but out of the server.
Yeah. They were fun because it works on how people communicate with each other, and you can see like the people that are big voices in game are usually big voices in situations like that as well. So cool.
Nice.
I wanted to move a bit outside EU and NA and a bit towards APAC and Apex. And we talked about like before that, the LAN client and all this stuff. I think like, for example, like the Chinese scene right now, the Korean scene, they already in a situation that it is more advanced than both Europe and NA, since they don't have the restrictions to play online constantly. Like everyone is located nearby. So I think they have the edge in that regard. And like we sent over there like our lamp and vision to go and participate there, basically, since it was like one team out of 12 teams, was it, or 16? Like
12. I think it was 12 teams there.
Yeah. Or
I think
it was 8. It was 4 that were instantly promoted, and I think it was another. Yeah, it was 12 teams. Okay, so like Blizzard somehow made it so that only one Western team would go there, and I mean, we expect it because of the meta changes, because of the roster changes, since they had like to swap, like not swap, to replace Num logged with Chain, and I don't know like how much experience Chain had in the past year with LANs and tournaments and stuff like that. But I feel like these regions are a bit like they have a better structure altogether, and for me personally, like for Contenders, they should move towards this kind of structure somehow, like to get teams in line environment a lot more than just like a week or 2 days at the end of the tournament. Like either increase the number of tournaments played throughout a certain period, or have like additional tournaments so that teams can go there and participate in LAN environments, or otherwise like have some kind of circuit like the LCS or something where teams will go like after they're narrowed down to 16 or 8 or something, go and play more matches on LAN, because it's a really different environment, right? Even the experience with the stage, having a live audience, or having to do all the I don't know, like did it affect you in LA, all these media days and stuff, like to do, I mean, personally, like fatigue or having some people out of comfort zone, for example, maybe? What's your take like on this?
Yeah. So there's even just playing in the same area is very different from playing online. Like even just like the people being physically next to each other, all the players, it's different atmosphere. So to kind of address all the different like aspects of it, firstly, the way people interact in person is different than they interact online. So that's one thing, as well as the media days. I don't know that those had a negative impact. I mean, it was a day we couldn't scrim, but it was overall like those can be fun experiences and good for the team. So I think the biggest thing is having to play under pressure is very different. So the two things I'll address on that is, firstly, like playing in front of a crowd the crowd actually isn't as big of a deal because you have a screen in front of you. Whereas if you're like a musician, you can see the crowd, out of your peripherals. Where if you have a big monitor in your face, you actually can't see them unless you look over. So as long as the players can stay focused on what's in front of them, it's not as big of an issue, unless there's like sound issue. So like the NGE, and when we went to the winter premiere LAN with Immortals, the sound issues were crazy compared to what it was in LA. So obviously outside of like the physical things, but one of the things that I really like about having a circuit style or being able to play consistent tournaments is that the teams learn to adapt to opponents better because they know their opponent's style. And being able to play the same opponents over and over gives you a chance to really learn them and and adapt and do things that you wouldn't normally do. Because if you're just playing some team next week, you don't know who you're going to play or whatever. You don't have time to practice against their style. You just have to perfect your. So that's why even in Contenders, even though you only got to play them once, you had a chance and opportunity to know who you're playing and build your strategies around it and be able to play like, this is how on this map we're going to play our comp and they're going to have to deal with us. Whereas on this other map, we know they're strong on it. They're probably going to play XYZ. We have a chance to adapt and learn against these other teams to figure out how we can best counter this, you know? Yeah. So there's a lot of benefits being able to play each other consistently under high pressure circumstances, which is a huge benefit. And I think that's why Korea is so far ahead. And China, I think, are ahead right now in like their competition's closer than NA's like really spread out as far as skill levels, I think. Compared to China, they're a little closer. I think their top end's a little lower, but you know, that's all. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, so I think that once NA can get everyone together, all in the same circumstances, whether it's Overwatch League, Contenders, you have consistent teams you're playing, consistent formats and layouts. That's huge for improvement.
I mean, if
I hope I addressed it.
If you think about it, you actually, like, you played one best of series, you played 3 maps there. You actually went to LA to play escape rooms and play some Overwatch on the side. Right? Like, yeah. I think it's a little, yeah, like going there, playing one best of 5 series, and then, you know, sitting there is sort of a bad format. Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. It is.
I hope that in the future it's more player centered and team centered, where it's really focused on you get to practice, you get to play and get experience on, because it is so unique. And even on the same coin as being able to play NA versus EU and play these different styles, it pushes your team because you have to adapt to a different style. That's something that in North America, most people play the same stuff. There's some teams that vary a little bit. I think, you know, in Vision, it's probably the least North American out of all the teams in terms of style. And they're the ones representing North America in APAC, you know? So, you know, it's interesting. Just see how it all works out.
Them and Renegades, basically. Renegades were running the wild stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? If you're just getting stomped to the ground, why not? Yeah.
I agree. Who do you think will win tomorrow? Like, I favored TC Busan a bit. I know you haven't really studied all the games, and you know it's like there has been a lot of matches around lately to study. Like Contenders ended a few weeks ago. Now it's the APAC matches.
Apex in between.
Apex in between. The World Cups like screams. The team scream right now and stuff like that. So I don't know, like
best of 7 quarterfinals in APAC, which is just insane. Like,
yeah, it's funny.
It didn't matter really. Like I think
it didn't. But
in the end, like best of 5, and if it's going to be a close best of 5, it's the same as the best of 7. Like I don't know why
in length,
they prefer a best of 7.
It could be a close best of 7 though, and then you're there for 5 hours or something, right? So yeah, I don't like that as a you know, in the season 2 Apex finals. Runners said that the endurance was a big factor, that, for instance, Cox shut down in the last couple of matches, couldn't shot call as well anymore. I mean, yes, it's a skill set, but it's also not a skill set that is often asked for in the run-up to the finals. So suddenly you're playing a very different thing, and you win by different metrics. And in general, also Caracol and I, like, winning by different metrics is terrible in the sense that also, like, introducing different maps for the finals is just unspeakable. Like
forgot about that one.
Yeah,
don't get
I think it definitely makes it harder to judge who is realistically the better team when you introduce another variable like that out of nowhere, because it's hard to, you know, if someone just can't play that well after 3-4 hours compared to playing well for 2 hours. I guess it's something you can add to it. It's like, you know, this team's better here. But I don't know. I think it's similar to, changing the map pool for playoffs, or just adding it for like between semis and finals. Yeah.
And changing it by getting rid the good maps of some teams while allowing the best maps still for some other teams. Like, screw you. You go ahead. Like, you go and play your own game. Like, I don't know. That was a big throw off for me, because Contenders Season 1, although the format, the round robin format, drags too long if you're going to play it properly, it has this this unique thing that by the end of the group stage, you have somehow, you know the best teams, how they measure, and then when you go in the playoffs, you know which teams need to overperform or to go another mile just to secure the win. So we saw, for example, Cloud9, they had a terrible season during the group stage. Then they go on LAN, they almost beat Misfits if it goes for Ilios not being the last map, right? For example, if it goes like Slizak Tower, they could pull off the upset. But then they go on and just throw it to samples, like ignoring everything that was built up until that point, like ignoring teams practice, ignoring analysts' predictions, ignoring like the analysis built. Like, I was preparing for my analysis, and then I know the map pool is different. Like, rip that.
Yeah.
I don't care to do analysis anymore. Like, to create content for the tournament. Like,
That's a good point. It's because it all flows together, right? If it's a big production, it help your analysts out. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's also, if you think about it, I feel like, and obviously, like, I'm not as learned on these things, but it feels like many big finals are currently being won by curveballs that teams throw at each other. So, for instance, one of those examples would be GC Busan, like out of nowhere pulling like a world-class Genji on Profit, and then like for the last couple of games, and I was watching together with Sideshow, and he was like, "What are they doing? Like, why would you take Profit of Tracer?" And for some reason, it just works marvelously, right? And then, obviously, this is the fun part, where the team throws the curveball, not the system throws the curveball.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, now it's Junkertown for Game 7 of an Apex final or something. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, right?
Yeah. I think it's great to be able to give the teams an opportunity to be creative and be able to adapt, rather than forcing them to adapt by changing the constant, I think a system like Counter-Strike with the maps, you have a specific pool. These other maps don't exist for this whole tournament, and you let the teams play on those maps for the whole thing and don't change it at all. To give examples like what you just said, it's more exciting to see a team pull out an unusual pick or a different comp on the same map, because you get to measure it with the same, with the variables being the team, not the map.
This was attempted in the very beginning, like Atlantic Showdown, the very first big LAN tournament had this kind of map pools. Then it was used in other tournaments. I don't remember. I think Carbon also had it, and maybe NG also, like after the initial mess with the map pools. I think it went towards this kind of format where you're going to play best of 5, and you can select maps from a specific map pool. I think like, I'm not sure, but you need to get rid of one game mode for this kind of map pool to work, like Control. But but I think like when you have 4 game modes and you're going to narrow it down to 7 maps, it's like you can't pick 2 of each, right? And you have to make sure that one of them is played once, Control,
right.
And and then you have all these different problems. But if you get rid of one game mode, I'm not going to repeat it. I think I made my point already. Yeah. So I think it could be better. I don't know. Like, it's, and for me that's the problem with Overwatch League. Like, they're rushing this thing and they haven't figured out even the underlying foundation of it all. Like, the tournament format, are all game modes competitive? Are all maps designed properly? Like, I feel some maps have so generic layout that they only promote dive. Like, if you can play dive, you're going to play dive. They promote nothing else. Whereas other maps, like when they're in the map pool, you see so many creative strategies, so many approaches, which is like, no matter how many times you see the map played, it's still a different game, a different experience. Unless, of course, it's like the quad tank meta and everyone's playing tanks. Like this was the only time that it was like boring to watch that map being played over and over again. But I think in the current meta, maps like King's Row, for example, every single time you can see someone pull off something different. Maybe it's a Reaper in the attack, maybe it's a Reaper
Just
at the
today,
third
Bastion,
point. Yeah, because the map layout allows it. Like, for example, when you approach the last point, you have this gap in the side, so environmental kills become a factor then. So you can have like build around a comp that takes advantage of that, or where you're in the roads phase, like there's some narrow gaps that you can have like Zarya and Reinhardt still perform in every meta and still like have success with it. So I think they should have allowed even one more year to figure out all these things, run as many tournaments as possible, so that they can like test every single aspect of them, like throw as many experimentation of formats you want, like refine your maps, find which maps the teams are allowed to play the most compositions and the most play styles, and then build together the Overwatch League and push it forward. Like I think it would have been a much better product overall. And
I mean, I don't know about more time. I feel it feels like because there's still this lingering feeling of pre-Overwatch League, and okay, maybe the tournament organizers would have reacted differently towards a like a message. Okay, we're going to start Overwatch League in 2019, and maybe it would have made sense for them to invest in the scene then. But most of them were burnt by League of Legends, like building the brand for Riot, having it on their circuits, and then Riot was like, oh yeah, we're doing SAS now. There's no more tournaments for you. Like the reputation for hosting.
They could still throw the tier 2 scene to the tournament organizers.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
You just find the best, or in the European region, you appoint him to run the Contenders side of things. You find the best one in the NA region, you appoint him to run the Contenders teams, and you ally all the rest, like the teams that don't make it to the playoffs of Contenders, like for example to the top 16 teams, then they're allowed to participate in the other tournaments. So it's like a qualifying phase that lasts I don't know how many days or weeks, and then all the other teams are going to participate in the other small tournaments, and you have that proven organizer to run your show for Contenders. Like I think that they could have been so many solutions, but Blizzard decided a very specific path that has like a few problems that could potentially.
I don't know about taking more time, but I think they could have also been more effective with their time, because for the longest time, like during the run-up to it, like we didn't have tournaments. There was no trying out, and then everything feels like tryout, and then like maybe they also didn't change drastically enough to test best, but at the same time I understand the reasoning that people actually want to experience a consistent rule set. I think a big selling point actually of the OMM was that, like, we sort of thought, okay, this is Overwatch, this is the metrics we're competing by, pick ban and everything, right? Like every weekend we have the same process, the same faces we see, like they one up each other. It's like, okay, this is Overwatch now. I guess let's see how these teams play against each other. Well, then after that, it became like, okay, now we're having these maps in there, and we're forcing you to play these maps. There was a lot of resistance to that as well, right? And then, yeah, for them to not have an answer, like a definitive answer at this point, or at least, okay, let's be fair, one that satisfies us both, right, is a little bit, disappointing, but I guess we will see how it turns out in Overwatch League, right?
Yeah, I think where it is now, it's more of a product of them choking the tournament organizers than it is lack of time. I do think time could be an answer, but I think it would have probably been more beneficial to let the scene breathe and give everyone a chance to do all these things and try these things out. Because if there was twice as many tournaments, you have such a bigger sample pool of information to pull from on what would work best for Overwatch. So I mean, I don't know all the back end stuff as to why. So I won't try to speak to that, but I think
I have
you know,
a theory.
fighter.
I have a theory, but I'm waiting to see, like, because it's too much of a coincidence that both League of Legends and Blizzard announced their leagues at the same time. So like there's this kind of conspiracy theory behind.
Yeah, maybe they were forced by market forces. It's quite
yeah,
obvious,
like riding a wave that they thought it will give them something back by riding it. Anyway, that's a discussion for another episode, because it's already like, I mean, for me, it's these are the fascinating discussions, right? Coaching stuff, building the scene, behind the scene, all this stuff, right? Because I mean, the players will come and go. Some will stay, some will go, some will be excellent, some other will be like tier 2. I think sometimes we focus too much on them right now, and the scene is still developing, right? It's not like in CSGO where it's been running for I don't know how many years, like right now, 5-6 years or something, and then before that you had CS 1.6 and stuff like that. So you have like this build up and people knowing the names and focusing on them. Right now, somehow I feel like we focus too much on the players, and we're missing the bigger picture, which is like the whole process of building a competitive foundation. And up to a point that it's on Blizzard because it is allowed, as we said, the tournament organizer, but up to another point is that people just don't discuss these things, right? There are not so many podcasts pondering on this stuff, and giving opportunities to people behind the scenes to talk about them. Like we had in the previous episode, we had Nuki, who has worked with tournament organization. We had told that we had Damon, which was another coach, a very unique at that. Like he also had some kind of stories to tell us about his opportunities with movie stars and how the whole thing played out. Anyways, I think like
it's always like, I think there's always this story of a lot of self-sacrifice from these people, like which we also see with you. Like it's a situation where you get very little back, and it's also like it just happens to be the case that all three sort of are now outside Overwatch League, when less deserving people from our perspective are in and enjoying that based on metrics that we don't really value, but I guess the market does. It's always sort of unfortunate that when these things happen and good people sort of get screwed over by these
wins goes a good
yeah.
Anyways, any final thoughts? I think it's like a 1 hour and a half.
Yes.
Almost.
Yeah.
Like any final topics, like maybe the winner for tomorrow, just so we can bet on it.
Ooh.
Like... I'm calling GC Busan.
How much?
I'm calling Busan. How much? Oh no, my whole salary. GC Busan.
No, I mean the score. Not. Oh, I don't want to.
We don't bet here. I think it's a best of 7, right? I'm not wrong in that.
Yeah.
I think they'll win 4-2. I don't think it'll go 7. So I think they're just really good with the changes with Mercy Zen.
I agree.
Yeah, she hasn't affected all that much, right? They had closer move from Lucio to Messi, and that's basically it. Like the dive is still here. Winston is still here.
It's still here, but it's so different now, just because your Zen is a lot harder to protect, and you have to decide: do you sacrifice your Zen and res him, or do you try to set him up for success? It's one of those things. I think Busan probably has more of a chance to do it.
And Busan are like a nightmare for every Zen to play against. Like, I was watching with Sideshow, and like in dry ones, they just like, okay, say they force a Zen, Ruje Hong to use his Transcendence, like by not using ultimates just because like Prophet and Gesture run up to him. Okay, they sacrifice Gesture. Like, Ruje Hong comes out of his Transcendence instantly capped, like one-clipped by Prophet. So now you're on equal footing in a fight where the opponent used a support ultimate, right?
Right.
So, and it's like quite often these dry runs rely on like a sacrificial gesture. Now you just rest a Winston, right?
Yeah.
And it keeps going. It doesn't get better, right? So yeah. I think in my mind it kind of even boosted the chances for GC, and I also quite like the storyline, even though it's sort of heartbreaking. But if RunAway actually becomes the solid Kongs of Overwatch, that would be insane. Yeah. So 4-2. What are you saying, Caracol?
I would go even further. Like if GC Busan just flips the sweet zone, you know, and they're on their game, like it could be even a 4-1, like with like one map just barely losing it, maybe like a control or something. Although it's really hard because I did a brief analysis just today where I looked like at the hero styles, the hero pools, the team composition that they have played the most and stuff like that, just to see the trend and the play style. If they pressure Bumper, he's not solid on Mercy. Like he's going for some risky plays. He gets punished by even lesser teams. So like teams like GC Busan, if they're going to pressure him, he's going to crumble. And without Mercy, in a Mercy meta, this is like a 7v5. So it's an easy win, right? Unless, of course, like somehow Kaiser with his Reinhardt brings an answer, something like out of the ordinary for GC Busan, or maybe Stitch with a Junkrat, for example. He had so much pressure to Profit and Hurek that he keeps them back, right? But otherwise, I see like it's a very possible scenario that it's going to be a stomp for GC Busan. Like,
yeah,
they're too good right now. But I liked really the Sacrificial Zen. Like this, I really like it because without Lucio, there's no one to protect him. So, like, he's at the mercy of Mercy.
Oh boy. Yeah, I don't think.
And you hear the Mercy player. Do you trust me? You have to die.
Just die.
or you know, like, because I think also in this meta, Mercy player is going to be the shot caller, just because he has a better view of the whole battlefield. Much like Lucio could ride the walls and just get a better view of some, like, you know, like when you hear him saying, laying down the plan, like, okay, we're going to sacrifice our Zen, like, you know, the Zen player is going to be like, pick Winston for once, like, you know. Anyways, that's
I guess every Overwatch League team in this meta needs 2 Zens just for mental health reasons. Like, yeah, I think it's going to be 4-2 as well. And the maps that are going to be competitive is, like, I liked RunAway on King's Row. If they play that, they had a very strong street space today, even though, like, I don't know what Miracle Youngsters was doing, like throwing Widow Hanzo, like like Leaf played in his day, so they take first point almost immediately with a Bastion. He has the ultimate, they can't get through with Bastion, and then he switches some mad amount of times between the heroes. I think he played 6 different heroes in order to get to the street space, and it just didn't happen. It's insane. Like, this is some solo queue shit. Like, yeah, I don't know.
If it was a close match, it could go up to 13 maps basically, or I don't know how many maps. Because do you know about that if the teams die on a map, for example, let's say Hybrid, they get 3 points. And they can't get another tick on the second attempt, so they die on the map. Then they play another map of the same game mode, so they play another Hybrid to solve the tie.
Yes, that's exactly the case, and that also means the double icon wall dream is alive, because if they constantly keep tying.
No, icon wall is not in the pool.
Okay, yeah. Okay. But maybe
you could play, like, I don't know how many back-to-back hybrids you can chain, or 2 CP maps like you can chain. Just we're taking the 5th break for the day, like for the players to get some massage on their shoulders. And
you know, that's interesting though, because I remember in Contenders a lot of the people complained about having, if it was a tie on one of those maps, you'd go to Ilios, and a lot of people complained like that doesn't suit the reason why you tied. If one team's just a really good control team, and then you tie on hybrid, go to control. I don't know that playing a different map in general is the answer, though.
Yeah, it feels strange.
Yeah, they could add just some kind of time bank, like another 5-4 minutes, and see who gets like past the first point or who gets the most progress on the map. Like, I think they could do that, but I don't know how.
Yeah.
If it's easy to implement, like, or if they need to change so many things in the code and break a few things along the road, like it happens.
I think in general, like if you compare it to soccer, Control is actually very much to Overwatch what penalty shootouts are to soccer, because it's fairly random, right? Not always the better, team wins in those.
Right.
And yeah, it's really boiled down to the very basics. Like shooting a ball to the goal is like winning a team fight without much setup, right? Really, on many of the Control maps, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think it could be if Control had some adjustments to it wasn't so reliant on one fight. I don't know. I guess that's another topic. It probably.
Yeah. Let's keep it for another appearance on the show. I mean...
Sure. Maybe when you get signed for an Overwatch League team in season 2.
There you go.
Booked it.
That's going to be 2 years down the line. Come on, we need it earlier.
Why 2? Yes.
Contract.
I don't know.
There are more Overwatch League teams starting. Right?
Yeah, maybe after
there you
July. Like, do a summer episode or something. Like,
Summer dreams. Anyway, that was episode 18 of Overrated. We see you guys next time. Cheers.